The 50th Annual Hallmark Heritage Awards were held on May 7th, 2024 at the Wentworth Villa Architectural Heritage Museum, 1156 Fort Street, Victoria, British Columbia. The Mistress of Ceremonies for the event was Pamela Madoff. The evening began with recognition of those properties that in the past year had received an official designation as a municipal heritage property. These properties will now have a level of heritage protection derived from a municipal bylaw. The first property was 557 to 561 Fiskard Street. Built in 1908, the Lee Woy and Company building was designed by architects Hooper and Watkins. It has retail storefronts on the ground level, and the Dart Coon Club and the Chi Kung Tang occupy the second floor. 565 Fiskard Street, 1618 to 1628 Government Street. The Lee Block was designed by C. Elwood Watkins and built by Thomas Bryden in 1910 for Lee Woy, Lee Yang, and Lee Chung. The main floor corner shop has been occupied by Quan Lees since the 1950s. 54 Government Street. This late Victoria Italianate cottage was built in 1898 for or by Robert Stewart Donaldson and his wife Janet. They left Victoria in 1905. It was designated in 2023 by 24-year owners Michael Mullins and Gail Nelson. The Lewis Street Citizen-Led Heritage Conservation Area, which includes 6 new heritage registrations. Number 19, number 20, number 24 to 26, number 35, number 38, and number 67 Lewis Street. More about this shortly. 1737 Rockland Avenue. Architect Samuel McClure's design for the chalet, or Treninnock, was commissioned by Archibald Galetly in 1899. Galetly, the manager of the Bank of Montreal, lived in 1715 Rockland and had 1737 built for his sisters Alice and Amy. When his wife and daughter drowned on SS Clallam after sinking off Trial Island in January 1904, Alice and Amy moved in with him to look after his household. From 1904 to 1905, Jenny and Robert Bouchard rented 1737 while their own McClure bungalow was being built at the Bouchard Gardens. 404 Henry Street. Last year we announced that the late architect Alan Hodgson's own home, designed by him over a 26-year period, had been designated. However, we didn't know that its massive native rock foundation is also designated heritage. His widow, Sheila Hodgson, calls their rock a spiritual entity. She and then heritage planner John O'Reilly agreed that the rock should be included in the designation as an essential part of the house. We will now begin with a Hallmark Heritage Awards of Merit. A Hallmark Heritage Society Award of Merit goes to Lara Harrell for the Citizen-Led Lewis Street Heritage Conservation Area. Lewis Street, a quaint and historically rich enclave in James Bay, offers a captivating glimpse into Victoria's past. Just a block long, bordered by Dallas Road to the south, with no access to the north, this narrow street boasts a collection of charming houses dating back to the turn of the 20th century. The architectural tapestry of Lewis Street is as diverse as its history, featuring Victorian styles as well as Edwardian vernacular arts and crafts, colonial and California bungalows, and English arts and crafts bungalows. The close proximity of the houses to the street, coupled with the absence of sidewalks, contributes to the street's unique ambiance, reminiscent of a bygone era. The earliest house, Gladys Villa, was built by William Robinson in 1876 on 2 acres of land at the north end of present-day Lewis, facing Menzies Street. Captain Herbert George Lewis, after whom the street was named, owned land in the area, but lived from 1863 to 1905 at 227 Belleville Street, which in early days was a continuation of Dallas Road. In the late 1880s, several other grand houses were built in the area, including one at the southeast corner of Lewis and Dallas, which was designed by architect S. C. Burris for C. E. Renouf in 1887. This was on land originally owned by Captain Lewis. 10 smaller houses were built along Lewis Street before 1911. Residents at that time included 4 ship's captains, 2 carpenters, a dressmaker, a storesman, an engineer, a laborer, and a woman of own means. In 1911, John and George Playfair and cousin George Kramer acquired Gladys Villa, which was moved west and renumbered 66 Lewis. They divided the remainder of the 2 acres into 12 lots. From 1912 to 1929, they constructed more than 20 houses for $2,000 to $3,000 each. They built 1 or 2 houses per year with a gap during World War I. In the 1970s, the working-class 1911 cottage at 34 Lewis was bequeathed to the city by its last owner and was removed to make way for Lewis Park, a focus for the street, and a well-used neighborhood amenity. In 2008, the neighborhood did a porch project. In 2018, with a City of Victoria Good Neighbor grant, permanent historical plaques were installed on the front fences of each of the 18 properties describing the date the house was built, first residents' names, and their occupations. Lara Harrell, who moved here from Calgary, was out for a walk when she stumbled upon this little gem of a street. To her, it felt like a real step back in time. In 2013, she was able to buy a home on Lewis Street. By 2019, she was worried about the fate of her street and wondering what she could do to ensure that this historic street retains its look and ambiance for future generations. She invited former Mayor Lisa Helps and other city councillors to visit her. After walking along the street, the mayor told Lara that the best way to preserve Lewis Street was through a heritage conservation area, and that it would be an ideal candidate for one. After canvassing neighbors for their interest and submitting the nomination, the long process began. Lara says her neighbors David McMinn and Linda Carlson were a huge support from the start. David shared his historical research concerning Lewis Street. Linda was key in offering her knowledge and assistance for the required community meetings with neighbors and the city held in Lewis Street Park. Lara says that during this effort, residents reflected on what makes this unique street so special. There is a diversity of residents adding to its character. In the midst of an affordable housing crisis, they informed the city that most of these homes have basement suites and other secondary accommodation for reasonable rents. Residents loved the annual old-fashioned summer potlucks in the park and conversations in their front gardens with visitors. These are some of the reasons why residents made the effort, despite many hurdles in 5 years, to keep moving forward with the Heritage Conservation Area. The Heritage Conservation Area only succeeded because of the support of those who live on Lewis Street. It would not have been successful had neighbors opposed it. A citizen-initiated project is a collective effort, and it is the collected who are to be congratulated. Lewis Street Heritage Conservation Area Guidelines were drafted by Senior Heritage Planner John O'Reilly and adopted by the City on February 8, 2024. The guidelines contain the history of Lewis Street, beginning with First Nations presence and a statement of significance. They offer direction for design of new buildings, infill development, alterations to existing buildings, and landscape design. These guidelines not only safeguard Lewis Street's architectural character, but also provide a framework for future development while honoring its historical significance. The designation of Lewis Street as a heritage conservation area ensures that its unique charm and character will be preserved for generations to come, offering a precious window into Victoria's past amidst the evolving urban landscape. The Award of Merit was presented to Lara Harrell and David McMinn for the Lewis Street Heritage Conservation Area. The next Hallmark Heritage Society Award of Merit goes to Jessica Edison for the rebuilding of 1150 McClure Street after a disastrous fire. 1150 McClure Street was designed by architect H. J. Roos Cullen, who also designed 1151 McClure across the street. 1150 was built for $3,500 in 1908 for Maria Gertrude Denny, widow of William Denny, who died in 1905. He came here in 1862 for the gold rush and eventually went into the dry goods business with David Spencer. Maria married William in 1880 and raised their daughter, along with 7 stepchildren from his first marriage. She lived in this house until her death in 1939. Jessica Edison was a single mom with 2 kids when she purchased the house in 2007. There were several suites in the house for rental income. She learned about renovating from her nana, who had been in the business of buying, fixing up, and selling old houses. But she was taught how to use the tools needed to make this happen by her dad, Paul Edison. It was his help that made the McClure house a possibility. He gifted her the down payment needed to buy the property and pitched in over the years, lending his hands and knowledge to help with some of the restorations. Mike McComb joined the family in the house in 2012. They slowly worked away at restoring the house over the years, fixing it room by room when they could afford to. They had almost finished their renovation in early 2018. On March 19, 2018, in its 110th year, the house was gutted by fire which started on the veranda. Jessica's and Mike's 3-year-old son Jasper was in the living room and saw the curtains on fire. His 16-year-old brother Sam, who was upstairs enjoying the first day of spring break, smelled smoke and yelled fire. Sam alerted his 13-year-old brother Finn and their grandmother. Sam picked up Jasper and ran him out to the backyard. Then he and Finn got the tenants out of the basement and tried to extinguish the fire. They tried to call the fire department, but the landline was dead. Luckily, several neighbors had called 911. 24 firefighters had attacked the blaze on the ground and with a ladder truck. They used a drone equipped with a heat sensor to fly above the home and identify unseen hotspots. Jessica and Mike return from work and grocery shopping to find their home destroyed. Although the masonry foundation was still intact, it had to be removed because the contamination from fighting the fire could not be remediated. Villamar Construction drew up the plans for the reconstruction with reference to Roos Cullen's original plans from 1908. City permits took 1 year to obtain, and the new house took 1 year to build. The house was rebuilt to modern building code, including seismic upgrading. Jessica and Mike had the new house built as much as possible like the old. They were required to build it 3 feet wider and with taller basement ceilings to accommodate 2 legal suites paid for by insurance. They used masonry for the veranda foundation piers, although the veranda posts were now square instead of round. They were required to heighten the roof to allow for more bedroom headroom on the second floor, making the roof steeper. It's incredible how the history of 1150 McClure Street intertwines with the resiliency and determination of Jessica Edison, aided by Mike McComb. From its origins in 1908 to Jessica's purchase in 2007 and the devastating fire in 2018, each chapter tells a story of endurance and determination despite the setbacks. Her commitment to rebuilding with the guidance of Villamar Construction reflects her dedication to preserving the essence of the original while meeting modern building standards. They moved back into 1150 McClure on St. Patrick's Day just before the COVID lockdown in 2020. The Hallmark Heritage Society Award of Merit goes to Jessica Edison for the rebuilding of 1150 McClure Street. We now have a Hallmark Heritage Society Award of Merit to Brian as Leslie Lord for the sensitive restoration and rehabilitation of 194 Olive Street. This 980 square foot California arts and crafts bungalow at 194 Olive Street was designed by architect Milo S. Farwell for widow and dressmaker Adele Winifred Hill. It was built in 1912 for $1,950, and in 1913 Adele added the garage for $75. Neville and Hamley Hopkins were there from about 1919. Then, in 1928, recently widowed Laura Annie Plant bought the house and lived in it until her death in 1971, almost 45 years. After 11 years' ownership by the Gigliotti family, Leslie and Brian Lord bought the house and moved in on July 30th, 1982. The first thing Brian did was remove the cementitious shingles to expose the original double-coursed or lapped siding over a 2-year period. They then painted the house a deep brown with cream trim. In 1984, they removed the flimsy jerry-built back deck, and in 1987, Brian built a more sympathetic and spacious one. In 1999, he topped it off with an arts and crafts pergola. In researching their house, the Lords became interested in the arts and crafts style and the furniture and decor associated with the movement. They added colorful accents with arts and crafts fabrics, stencils, and light fixtures from Water Glass Studios in Victoria. Leslie began collecting copper and pottery of the period. The couple did extensive work on the interior, using the original untouched dining room as a template. The outdated bathroom was gutted and recreated using period tiled wainscoting and flooring. Vintage style plumbing and light fixtures were installed. In the late 1980s, in the unfinished basement, 2 bedrooms and a second bathroom for the kids and a laundry area were added. Once the kids moved downstairs, the family room was created out of the back bedroom in the early 1990s. Its custom-made wall panels and woodwork replicate that in the dining room. The kitchen was redesigned and transformed over several years, starting in 1995. Brian worked on one area at a time, replacing small wallpaper-covered cupboards with full-height wooden cabinets with glass fronts. A new sink unit and cupboards were installed with fir V-joint paneling on all the cupboard walls. He created a granite island surrounding the stove which conceals the staircase to the basement. The old aluminum sliding glass back door was replaced by a wooden door salvaged from a Sam McClure designed home on the waterfront in Oak Bay. The window and another in the family room were built by Victoria's Vintage Woodworks. The previously infilled small back porch was removed and rebuilt as a dark wood-paneled breakfast nook in the corner of the kitchen. The living room was first renovated in the late 1980s. Brian added a solid fir mantel and mirrored overmantel to a stone fireplace. Built-in glass-fronted bookcases replaced open shelving. Between 1977 and 1982, the previous owner had removed the original living room and filled in the front porch with gyprock, stucco, and aluminum windows to create a much larger living room. But a porch is integral to a California bungalow and its relationship to the neighborhood. In 2002, they finally reclaimed the veranda, thus reducing the size of their living room considerably. The stucco and gyprock were removed, revealing original porch railings and posts still in place. The living room window is a single unit with 3 casement sections under a multi-light transom matching the original window. The new window also came from Vintage. The Lords then painted their house a deep olive green with cream trim. Lastly, the principal bedroom had its second facelift. Brian designed paneled wooden wainscoting, built-in drawers and cabinets. The work was done by a contractor. Outside, the neglected garden was transformed into an arts and crafts cottage garden. They've added fences, arbors, and trellises, and a huge variety of traditional plants. Brian and Leslie Lord's dedication to preserving the integrity of their home culminated in its registration as a heritage property in 2004 and designation by the city in 2009. Through their tireless efforts, the Lords have ensured that the 112-year-old bungalow retains its character and charm for many years to come, leaving a lasting legacy in their community. The Hallmark Heritage Society Award of Merit was presented to Brian and Leslie Lord. The next Hallmark Heritage Society Award of Merit goes to Don Hutton and Sheena Bellingham for the restoration and renovation of 2536 Richmond Road. 2536 Richmond Road, at the corner of Haldane Avenue, was built in 1906 for Garfield Vai and his new wife Lily Mae King, called Daisy, who married in October that year. Garfield died in 1920, aged 37, and Daisy brought up their 5 daughters and 1 son in this 2-bedroom house. She died in 1956, and family members remained in the house until after 1963. Garfield was the son of pioneers Alexander and Margaret By, who established the 105-acre Richmond farm in 1882. In 1892, his parents built a new 2-story Italianate house for their family at 1785 Carrick Street, now designated Heritage. The family built the Stone Arts and Crafts Bungalow at 1790 Carrick, also designated, and the Arts and Crafts Colonial Bungalow at 1846 Kings Road for family members. The family also operated a stone quarry on the slopes of Mount Tolmie. This Edwardian Queen Anne cottage has retained much of its original appearance, including sawn brackets on the eaves, ball and spindle frieze between turned porch posts, 1/1 double-hung sash windows, and glazed paneled front door with transom. Don Hutton, a wooden boat builder and clarinetist, and Sheena Bellingham, a ballet dancer with the Royal Winnipeg Ballet and then in Phantom of the Opera, were originally from Ontario. They bought a vintage wooden sailboat and sailed up and down the east coast of North America. In 2011, they shifted to Bellingham, sailed up to Victoria, and lived aboard at Hidden Harbour Marina. After searching for some time, they found the house and bought it in the fall of 2012. Their real estate agent suggested that the house was a teardown, a ridiculous amount of work and not worth saving. Fortunately, Don and Sheena convinced all concerned that it could and should be saved from the landfill. Their offer was accepted over those from developers who were only interested in the land. The house had been rented for many years and was in very poor condition. Dumpster loads of foul trash were removed from the yard. They removed trash in the house from attic to basement. The roof was a disaster which needed prompt attention. It was rebuilt by Don in the summer of 2012, utilizing his skill gained as a wooden boat builder. The front porch was covered with plywood over the rotten deck. The framing was also rotten, as were the bases of the turned wood posts. The front steps were concrete. Don drilled out the concrete and rebuilt wooden steps. He scarfed in new ends on the posts, reframed and redecked the porch. He rebuilt the missing balustrade to the right of the front door and newel post, which he scaled off their only archival photo from 1977. He built the stair balustrade and newel posts to match. New brackets at the top of the porch posts replicated the one remaining original. The windows were refurbished and storms were added. The house was totally stripped, prepped, primed, and painted in the original and traditional color scheme, one side per year. Don reshingled the dormers. He then built new multi-paned windows for them. Interior floors were refinished. The previous owner had replaced original plaster with drywall. The woodwork and wainscoting were refurbished and shellacked. Cove molding was installed, and the picture rail, which was missing in places, was replicated by Don. The rooms were all painted in appropriate colors. They decorated with period lighting and furniture, acquiring many pieces from auctions. The bathroom renovation included removing the jerry-built exhaust system. Don utilized the original sink and clawfoot tub, removing its tile surround. The woodwork was varathaned to protect it from moisture. The front bedroom to the right of the front door was converted to a library and sitting room. The staircase to the attic rooms within the library sitting room was completely redesigned and rebuilt by Don. The trees along the street front were planted about 40 to 45 years ago as a privacy hedge. Don Hutton and Sheena Bellingham's dedication to preserving the historic charm of 2536 Richmond Road is truly inspiring. Despite initial doubts about its salvageability, they saw its potential and embarked on a meticulous restoration journey. Their labor of love over the past 12 years is a testament to their commitment to honoring the history and character of this treasured home. The Hallmark Heritage Society Award of Merit is presented to Don Hutton and Sheena Bellingham for 2536 Richmond Road. The next Hallmark Heritage Award of Merit goes to Jordan Milne and GMC Projects for the sensitive rehabilitation of 1304 Government Street, 578 Yates Street, and 1306 Government Street. The three-story building at 1304 Government Street, with its attached one-story behind at 578 Yates Street, were both designated heritage in 1975. They were designed in 1891 by architect John Teague and built for the BC Land and Investment Agency by contractors Smith and Clark. For many years, the main shop on the corner was rented by H. L. Salmon, tobaccoist, with offices above. From 1917 until the mid-1960s, the main shop was home to Modern Shoes, which then became Fields Shoes until 2019, when the buildings were sold to GMC Projects. The Palace Saloon, proprietor Henry Siebenbaum, was in the one-story building on Yates. In 1902, Siebenbaum built the two-story building at 1306 Government Street for his Palace Cigar Store. It was designated heritage in 1995. On July 31, 2019, GMC Projects under Jordan Milne and Tony Kiptoo bought the three buildings now collectively known as the Adelphi Block to revitalize the commercial spaces and renovate the upper floors for three loft studio-style rental apartments. Architect on the project was Karen Hillel, engineer was Brandon Paxton, internal creative director was Sarah McNeil, and interior designer was Bidgood Interior Designs. With funding assistance from the City of Victoria's Victoria Civic Heritage Trust, GMC was able to undertake voluntary targeted seismic building and sidewalk upgrades to these three heritage-designated buildings through Victoria Civic Heritage Trust's Building Incentive and Parapet Incentive Programs and the city's Tax Incentive Program for seismic upgrading. The targeted seismic upgrade of the existing buildings was a voluntary undertaking by GMC with the hopes of conserving and rehabilitating the structures for long into the future. Seismic improvements were engineered to include new shear walls, anchoring of floors to walls, roof connections, parapet bracing, and restraint of existing unreinforced masonry walls. Building improvements included an electrical upgrade to increase the amperage load, which allowed for installation of a monitored fire alarm system, new exterior lighting, and grounded electrical wiring providing for early notification to the fire department. Spray foam and batt insulation were installed in all roof and ceiling cavities to improve energy efficiency and internal comfort. A vault area, accessed through the basement, existed outside the building wall of the main building and under the sidewalk. It could have been used for coal or general delivery, but historical plumbing permit drawings show use of this area as a bathhouse. The sidewalk above the vault was suspended on steel beams attached to the building's basement masonry piers. These steel beams were found to be corroded and failing to hold up the sidewalk. Stress fractures were identified on the beam and pier connections. Remediation consisted of deleting the steel beams, building a new retaining wall alongside the basement wall, and backfilling the void under the sidewalk to allow for a new concrete sidewalk. The new retaining wall allowed for the installation of seismic anchors that connected to the existing masonry piers, which acted as strongbacks in the reduction of seismic forces to the walls. Below-ground insulation and waterproofing were installed. Windows were all replaced with sympathetic wooden ones with laminated safety glass. Wood frame storefront glazing was reinstated with upper transom panels. The missing columns at ground floor level were reinstalled for continuity with the still existing upper columns. The building exteriors were stripped and repainted, and the unique architectural elements were highlighted. A new wooden residential entry door was installed. For decades, the second and third floors of the two buildings sat unoccupied. Now each of the three new apartments on these floors is unique. All boast custom kitchen millwork, in-floor heating in the bathrooms, seismic upgrades, and exposed interior brickwork. The common areas feature welcoming murals by local artist Lydia Beauregard, and one of the apartments offers a private rooftop deck. This project exemplifies the effectiveness of incentive programs and the commendable efforts of the city's Victoria Civic Heritage Trust in supporting the preservation and enhancement of Victoria's heritage buildings. Thanks to the collaboration with GMC projects, a once neglected building has been revitalized, shedding its bygone era status. Through this endeavor, these properties have reached their full potential, reclaiming their intrinsic character and charm for future generations to appreciate. The Hallmark Society is pleased to present this Award of Merit to Jordan Milne and GMC Properties for the sensitive rehabilitation of 1300-1304 Government Street, 578 Yates Street, and 1306 Government Street. We now have a Hallmark Heritage Society Award of Merit to Willie Disler for the renovation of 416-420 William Street. This three-story building and two adjacent structures were originally built as a bakery in 1907-1908. The buildings backed onto the ENN railway tracks to receive flour and shipped baked goods. The architects were Thomas Hooper and Charles Elwood Watkins, who were in partnership from 1902 to 1909. They designed such iconic Victoria buildings as Rogers Chocolates, Monroe's Books, and the Carnegie Library. The three-story bakery had a small building on the left for stables with a covered shed in between for the horse-drawn delivery vans. The owners were the Bakers Limited, who in 1907 took over the bed-breaking business of Moses R. Smith's Victoria Steam Bakery. George O'Kell was the manager until 1917. They had the contract to supply bread and biscuits to the Navy in Esquimalt, which Smith had held since 1858. From 1917 to 1927, Fairall's Limited Soda Water and Cordial Factory owned the property. In 1919, they became the official bottler of Coca-Cola for the area. From 1935 until after 1997, this was the home of New Way Cleaners. The building was then leased to an artists' cooperative. In 2008, Willie Disler bought the property to house the Victoria branch of his security business, which he sold in 2015 to Paladin Security. Willie still owns the buildings and Paladin are his tenants. Renovation began immediately in 2008 under the direction of J.C. Scott as historian architect and SOS, the structural architectural firm of Peter Schoening and Heather Spinney. The interior of the stables and van shed were demolished, leaving the brick walls. The gabled roof was rebuilt on the old stables. These are the trusses for the new roof, and steel I-beams and timbers for seismic upgrading. The upright steel I-beams and the heavy wooden timbers for seismic upgrading are now a feature in the renovative stable building. Throughout the offices in the formal stable, there are now horse references, including harnesses incorporated as door handles, hanging interior barn doors, and wind vanes with copper horses on the reconstructed ventilation cupolas. Mechanics were upgraded, shown here in the main building. They replumbed and rewired to create a new bathroom. They built an employee lounge and a kitchen. The original floors were stripped and refinished on the second floor of the main building. These consisted of on-edge 40-foot length timbers. Flooring and fittings were installed, creating new offices and meeting spaces. The exterior of the main building was refurbished and painted a cream color. The cornices were replaced and painted a dark green. The old stables were painted a traditional barn red. The former van shed was enclosed and extended in length to create more office space. It now has a brick facade painted to match the stables and details mimicking the main building. The finished complex still backs onto the disused E&L railway tracks. The large parking lot to the south was given a good drainage system. The main building and the infilled van shed now have wooden cellar story windows and double-hung sash windows reinstated and restored. The project was completed at the end of 2010, considerably over budget. Willie was pleased to have created a base for high technology within the city. He hopes his work on this raw diamond will give the building new energy and purpose long into the future. Accepting the Hallmark Heritage Award of Merit for Willie Disler for the renovation of 416-420 William Street is J.C. Scott. The Hallmark Heritage Society is now pleased to present a Communications Award to Helen Edwards for the publication of the 2 volumes of The Heritage Detective. Helen was born in Victoria to Hugh and Sandy Kelly. They lived with her grandparents, James and Edith Kelly, at 1172 View Street until her dad finished building their house at 802 Langham Court in December 1949. Helen attended Sir James Douglas Elementary, Central Junior High, and Victoria High, where she played in the orchestra. She was always a writer, penning plays at Sir James Douglas, which were presented to the class. She was aware early on of heritage sites as her family's camping vacations, including visits to historic sites and museums. She didn't know the word heritage then, but these seeds were sown. Helen Kelly married accountant John Edwards on December 28, 1970, in Reno, Nevada. Their serious involvement in heritage began when they bought 810 Linden Avenue, the house which is still her home. In February 1976, they were walking through Mayfair Mall during Heritage Week and stopped at the Hallmark Society booth. They joined on the spot, and John became secretary that fall. Despite having young children, Helen helped when she could, and today, 48 years later, she is still volunteering. She began working in the office and archives in the late 1980s and managed them through several moves. Later, she joined the board and served in different capacities, including 2 years as president. Helen's dedication extends beyond Victoria. She served on the board of Heritage BC for 8 years and was head of their awards committee. She spent 6 years on the board of Heritage Canada, which is now the National Trust for Canada. She joined the Canadian Association of Heritage Professionals, eventually becoming president. During her presidency, an alliance was formed between the Canadian Association of Heritage Professionals and the National Trust to co-sponsor annual conferences. She was one of a group of heritage professionals in BC who organized the provincial chapter of the Canadian Association of Heritage Professionals. Returning to the University of Victoria in 1994, Helen completed her degree in art history and cultural resource management, further enriching her understanding of heritage. Over the years, she wrote articles and books, including a history of professional hockey in Canada, re-released on January 20th, 2024, during a live broadcast from Scotiabank Hockey Day in Canada at the Inner Harbour. Then she wrote 2 biographies of her late father-in-law, Commodore John Crispo Inglis Dutchy Edwards. During COVID, Helen compiled the articles on heritage buildings that she had been writing for almost 50 years into 2 volumes and called them The Heritage Detective, The Hidden Stories of Ordinary Victorians Who Did Extraordinary Things, Volumes 1 and 2. Here is a sampling from the books of Helen's favorite buildings in the Capital Region, some of which are demolished or have been moved away. The books bring to life the stories behind the heritage buildings of the families, businesses, and organizations that have shaped Greater Victoria's history. They include new photographs and research that is now available via the Internet and other sources. For residents of Victoria and visitors alike, The Heritage Detective, Volumes 1 and 2, are great resources. They provide a deeper understanding of the Greater Victoria area, its history, and its culture. Currently, Helen is working on documenting the first 10 years of Victoria Harbour Cats' summer college baseball team. As a tribute to her late husband, Helen has created the John Edwards Conference Bursaries, providing financial assistance for volunteers to attend National Trust for Canada conferences. Last year, 10 attendees from all over Canada won bursaries. Helen's passion for preserving history and empowering others continues to leave a lasting impact on heritage conservation efforts. The Hallmark Society is pleased to present this Communication Award to Helen Edwards for her 2 volumes of The Heritage Detective. The Hallmark Heritage Society is now pleased to present a Communication Award for the creation of the Chinese-Canadian Museum in Fantan Alley. Victoria's Chinatown is the second oldest in North America after San Francisco and retains the most 19th century buildings. With those period buildings, interconnecting alleys and courtyards, it serves as a tangible reminder of the vibrant community that once thrived there, with over 3,000 residents at its peak in the 1880s. In response to historical injustices, the British Columbia government took significant steps to acknowledge and honor the Chinese-Canadian community. Premier Christy Clark's apology in 2014 marked a pivotal moment. This was followed by the unveiling of a monument at the foot of the Gate of Harmonious Interest, by Premier John Horgan in 2017, and a commitment to establish a dedicated museum celebrating Chinese Canadian heritage. In 2020, the Chinese Canadian Museum Society of BC was founded and soon opened temporary exhibition galleries in Vancouver and Victoria. In February 2022, the British Columbia government provided $27.5 million to the Chinese Canadian Museum to purchase the 1889 Wing Sang Building, the oldest brick structure in Vancouver's Chinatown. The Chinese Canadian Museum opened there on July 1, 2023, the 100th anniversary of the enactment of the Chinese Exclusion Act. The Victoria Chinatown Museum Society was founded in 2020. In February 2022, the Chinese Canadian Museum opened an exhibition gallery in rented space in Victoria's Van Tan Alley and has worked closely with the Victoria Society to mount exhibitions and other public programs in the museum. The Chinese Canadian Museum has provided the funding for this and has been fortunate to have Charlene Thornton-Joe as its Visitor Experience and Facilities Coordinator. Charlene is assisted by 40 talented volunteers. They have helped paint, mount exhibits, and provide personal contact with the more than 80,000 visitors who have toured the gallery since its opening. Chinese Canadian Museum staff in Vancouver provide professional support for the gallery's overall operations. The exhibition gallery is located at number 10 to number 14 Van Tan Alley in a building designed in 1912 by architect Charles Elwood Watkins for the Hoi Sung Ning Yung Benevolent Association. Daigoon, the big club gambling den, operated upstairs. In the last 2 years, the gallery in Van Tan Alley has had 2 main exhibitions: Gold Mountain Dream, created by the Royal BC Museum, and First Steps, Chinese Canadian Journeys in Victoria, curated by John Adams. By the end of June, a new feature exhibition will open called Victoria in the Time of Exclusion. There are smaller displays, including people and artifacts from the medical profession, including local restaurants and market gardens. Lee Young-Ark documented the Kwan family's Fiskard Street store. Other local businesses and restaurants are also documented. An exhibit on the magic of Tony Eng will remain through 2024. There has been an exhibit and a video on Chinese Canadians at war, highlighting the World War II service of Gordon Kwan as an example of the many others who served. The Chinese Canadian Museum always marks Remembrance Day. In addition to curating and hosting exhibitions, the Chinese Canadian Museum organizes community events such as Awakening Chinatown, Lunar New Year, Mid-Autumn Festival, and National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. The Chinese Canadian Museum has sponsored speakers such as Julie Lawson, who read from her book, White Jade Tiger. Outreach activities include workshops, talks, and tours, like this one to the Chinese cemetery. The Chinese Canadian Museum in Van Tan Alley serves as a vital cultural hub, fostering understanding, dialogue, and appreciation for the rich and diverse history of Chinese Canadians in British Columbia. This award recognizes the museum's outstanding efforts in preserving and sharing this important heritage. The Hallmark Heritage Society is pleased to present this communication award to the Chinese Canadian Museum in Van Tan Alley and Representative Charlene Thornton-Joe, the Visitor Experience and Facilities Coordinator of the Chinese Canadian Museum. This concludes the 50th Annual Hallmark Heritage Society Awards, and we thank you for viewing this and hope you will help preserve heritage in Victoria for the coming year. We wish to thank our sponsors and our volunteers in presenting this event.